Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Artwork Analysis. Now last week I talked about Zazaza, a cartoonist, an animator, and an illustrator. So let's push it back into the fine arts world. And what better way than to choose one of the most prolific realist painters in history, William Bouguereau. Now Bouguereau came in a time after the Renaissance, after all the realistic fundamentals have been established. But in turn, he mastered those fundamentals. He took those techniques and took it to the next level. And to this day, I still think he's one of the most technical realist painters in history. So what makes it great? Well, of course, you could go on forever on every single aspect of his work. But for the sake of length, I'm going to talk about two things he was incredible at. Among other things, obviously. Number one would be edges, and number two would be brushstrokes. So let's talk about edges. Edges, we have to look back into what makes something look real. Obviously, if it looks like we can see something in reality, that's what we're gauging our analysis of realism. If we can see something existing in reality, that's really it. So, when we take a photograph, a camera, you would think, hey, we're just taking a shot from reality, therefore it has to be realistic, right? That's not necessarily true. Because one of the things that cameras are insanely bad at is the use of focus and edges. Now, professional photographers will probably change the focus properly in order to replicate the edging a little bit better. So what I mean by that is they know when to use sharp edges, sharp focus, and when to blur it out to replicate the feeling of peripheral vision for human eyes. However, even then, cameras just have something missing. They just can't be able to replicate the human eye properly. Bouguereau, however, did. And he did it in such a way that is arguably one of the best in history. And I'm going to talk about this right now. So he balances sharp vision with softer edges. So where do you put sharp edges? Well, we're looking at this woman's nose. Let's use a different color here. As you can see, we want to focus on the nose because there's a sharp edge between light and shadow. Our eyes will always put focus on something we want to look at, and then everything else has to be blurred out properly. So of course, there's a little bit of glow here, but I will talk about that in the future, but otherwise, we can assume that this is a very sharp transition. Now, we want to talk about soft edges. What's the opposite? Of course, it's soft. Where is the most noticeable is probably the hair to the background. So as you can see here, there's really only half a value between the hair and the background. We don't want to look at it because we don't need to look at it. And that's a masterful use of creating vision. Look at the contrast between the nose and the hair. So let's assume that Bouguereau did not know what he was doing. What happens if we make something like this place sharper? See how that's a little bit wrong? We start to conflict our vision between the hair and the nose, and that's really impossible. This is what cameras tend to do unless you change the focus or you artificially create a scene so that this doesn't happen. We cannot possibly focus here and here at the same time. That is a fallacy on our human vision. So, of course, he knew what he was doing, so this is what we end up with. So that sounds a little bit easy, right? We just put sharp edges on where we want the viewers to look at, and then we put soft edges on where we don't want the viewers to look at. Sounds simple. What is the hardest part about this? The hardest part is when you have to create stuff in between. Not just here's the sharpest edge and here's the softest edge. What about the rest of the piece? Again, masterfully done. I want to talk about a few notable cases here. The hair above her face here. It's bright enough so that you know that it's lit, but it's dark enough so that it's not too strong. So what happens if I were to maybe brighten this? We start to notice that it doesn't look right anymore. We start focusing on this and it looks like we're conflicting our visions between 2 points of contact. Now let's make it darker. Then we just don't know if she has hair or not, and also it starts to look a bit awkward. It doesn't look like it's lit properly. This is a very, very subtle transition. To create a decision like this takes a lifetime worth of work. Now, of course, we can look into other places as well. The tiara, the transitions right here are masterful. Look how it blends. I'm going to use a different color again. Look how it blends together. It transitions properly. Again, we don't want to look at that. We really don't. So let's try to create that in between in our work. So other places as well include here. So here is I'm going to talk about something actually right here, because it's probably the most noticeable place that he does it. So if we were to look at this physically, the edge here is very sharp. There's a sharp line that disconnects the neck, the collar, to the robe here. This is still not a sharp edge. The reason why is the values of these two areas are very similar. Notice here and notice here. Because of that, Bouguereau creates an illusion of a softer edge, even though physically it's a sharp edge. So I want to really make it clear. There's two ways to vary the edge intensity, so to speak. Number one is, of course, the values. If you have one light, one dark, the more contrasting the values are, the sharper the edge will be. The other way is, of course, physically. Physically would be something like this. This is a physically sharp edge. But value-wise, going back to the first point, there's not a noticeable difference. Therefore, this is considered an illusion of a softer edge. So, to really drive home the point, let's say this is physically a softer edge. Okay, now that it's physically soft, right? But it still feels like it's sharper because of the contrast difference between the background and the light. So really take note of the two ways to create sharp and soft edges. So again, look into in-betweens. I want you to really Google this guy and look at his work and really see where the in-between edges are. You're going to start to notice that all his placements are very deliberate. Everything. And it comes down to composition movement and how Bouguereau wants you to look at something. So you see there's a very sharp edge right here goes into here and then transitions into here, and then you're fading back away. And now you're sharp again and you want to circle back in. So something like that. Of course, this is easier said than done, and Bouguereau is incredible at controlling it, among other aspects. So I want to move on to the next point, the brushstrokes. So we look at this piece, we're going to think this is very realistic. And most people who think realism is going to think everything is blended, there's a lot of shading going on, it's very beautiful. It's very realistic because of that. That's not necessarily true. Now, as the name implies, brushstrokes is simply leaving things simplified, as if you're not rendering it. So, where is it most prolific? Well, I mean, not prolific. Where is it most noticeable? The clothing. We want to think that the clothing is so real, but look at the brushstrokes. There's really, it feels like he's not even trying. It's just right there. And that's really the sign of a masterful artist. It's not about the shading, it's not about just rendering everything. It's where the artist tries to keep it simplified. Look at this. Look at this. Anybody could do this, right? You just put a few strokes down. But it's really the colors of those strokes as well as the placements of those strokes that create the effect of clothing. Did he really need to blur this area and render it excessively? No, because again, we are looking at her face. So by doing so, we are focusing on her face but not her clothing, and when we do that, that's how our human eyes work. We simplify whatever we aren't looking at. So of course we want to look into the hair as well. Notice how the hair here is a little bit more intricate, a little bit, compared to here. Do you see the brushstrokes right here? Now of course that's not to say this is not masterfully done, but look how there's a difference in complexity between the two areas. This is of course very deliberate because again, where is the focus? The focus is on her face. So as we radiate out from our focus, there's less details. Did you notice that? We notice that, hey, we want to focus on her face, and at best we also want to look at her tiara. I'm going to use a different color again here. Right here. But as we radiate out our visions, as we go into the peripheral vision, we start to have more simplified strokes. He doesn't need to work extra hours to make the piece worse. In fact, by simplifying, he makes it much better. And again, it shows the sign of a fantastic artist. Now, I want to go back into these areas as well, the hair. So when you're creating brushstrokes and you're creating softer edges, try your best to really think, where can I possibly fade one aspect of a piece into another? This will push your work into the next level. Because even if, let's say, you're not going to make decisions as well as Bouguereau, which how many people can really say they do, right? Just fade a few things that you know people don't need to look at. And your piece will be infinitely stronger because of it. Notice how everything here is simplified. It's as if he just had a few brush strokes and then he just faded it away. Very easy. Just choose a few areas where you feel like it doesn't need to matter. And you have to be able to control the edges and the brush strokes in such a manner that it doesn't look too out of place, but at the same time it still looks like it's something. So I want to really end this off with one of the more interesting areas as well for me. Notice the eyes. Well, the eye, rather. Notice how everything here, look at the very soft use of edges here. Again, it's done because the values are very close to each other, and then there's a few accents here. There's this area, just one brush stroke like that, and then there's the eyes shine here. And of course, a lot of anime artists will probably be really happy to hear that. This type of thing is very important for their style. One simple accent on top of a very soft area, and that's all it takes in order to create a realistic eye. And of course, let's do the opposite. Let's assume that he really doesn't know what he's doing, and I just ruined his piece. We think eyes are white, the pupil is black, and then we do something like this. That's a big no-no. That's gonna kill any sense of the realism. We don't need that much. We don't have to scream to the viewers that something is an eye. We just have to hint at the fact that it's an eye. And that's really how do you create realism, to be able to control where you create the soft edges and where you create the simplified brushstrokes. Let me tell you something really quickly. A lot of people in the digital age with digital media, they like to render. But I'm going to repeat this, and of course you probably understood this theme over this entire video if you watch this. You are a much better artist for simplifying rather than rendering like a monkey. A lot of people get into the trap of rendering too much, but even masters like Bouguereau are simplifying. That is what makes an artist great. Anyways, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.